My next guest has impacted my career in major ways. I have been a fan of his for many years. He has authored 12 books. Many of them are New York bestsellers. These books have provided a solid base for my education as well as inspiration for my career. He also wrote the foreword to my book, Space Marketing, Competing in the New Commercial Space Industry. He is an author, a speaker, an advisor, and a teacher. Please welcome David Meerman Scott. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great, Izzy. Thank you for that kind introduction. I didn't realize that I had influenced you that much.
Oh, you have influenced me in major ways, yes. So,
awesome.
If I got to say, I'm a little starstruck.
Nah, all good.
So, well, I have been reading your books for several years. I first picked up your book about 2008 because the industry had changed, and it was the new rules of marketing NPR.
Yep.
My first one was, I think, the 4th edition, and
Okay.
since then I've gotten the 6th edition, and I just read the 8th edition. So because
Even numbers.
Even numbers, yes. So the 2 hardback ones I gave out, and the Audible, you just can't do that with. So I have shared them with others.
Awesome.
And
thanks very much for that.
When I went to school, it was a key text for the marketing program that I was in. I got a master's in digital marketing, and it was a comprehensive nuts and bolts guide that, described. It was because the marketing industry had been drastically changing.
And where was that? Where did you go to school?
I went to Full Sail University in Florida.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
Yes, and it was a great program. I loved it. And at the time you wrote it, you were kind of cutting edge because the industry itself, I've been in the industry since 1995, 96. And when the smartphone came out and social media came out, nobody knew what to do. And everybody was kind of upside down. And you took a completely different tact with this book. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote the book the way you did?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like I had an unfair head start because starting in the late 1980s, that dates me a little bit, I was working for international financial information companies. So I worked for companies like Dow Jones and Thomson Reuters, and I worked in New York for a few years, Tokyo for 7 years, Hong Kong for 2 years, Boston for a few years. And what I was doing was marketing and sales of an electronic financial information system that was used by traders and people in the financial markets. And this was pre-web. So I knew what electronic information was prior to 1995, which is my line in the sand for when the web started, because that was the year that Netscape went public. And so I already knew what content was. I already knew what a blog was. I already knew what social media, although the name, we didn't use this name social media. We didn't use the term blogging. I knew what social media was because we use these systems on the trading floors. So, so then in the late 1990s, I was pushing this idea of marketing using content and things like email newsletters and creating a great content-rich website. And I started to talk about it a lot. And the company I was working for at the time, my bosses says, "Oh, we don't do that kind of marketing," and they eventually fired me. So that led to me starting my own thing and starting to write books and so on. And because I could clearly see where we were going. The marketing and public relations world was clearly going to this idea of content as being the way to do marketing, not paid advertising on the web, but content on the web. And so that's when I started to write books. And I wrote a book that came out in 2005. It's not as well known as The New Rules of Marketing and PR, but that was really the first book on this topic. Then The New Rules of Marketing and PR came out in 2007, and it became an instant bestseller, sold many tens of thousands of copies around the world. And then, you said you've read the 6th edition and the 8th edition. The current version is the 8th edition. I have to keep updating it because the basic idea hasn't changed. Marketing is about creating content, but what has changed is the tools that we have at our disposal. So I have to continually update the book. I also include new examples every edition.
Well, and one of the things about the book that has kind of rubbed off on me is that you're very much a part of that marketing is a relationship, and it's a two-way relationship, and the tools may change, but as long as you establish that relationship, it won't matter as much. They'll find you even if the tools change.
Yeah, and so many marketers still today are just pushing stuff out, constantly one-way broadcast and typically product related. Buy my product, buy my product, buy my product. And that just doesn't work in this environment anymore. In fact, as we're recording this, we now have ChatGPT and other AI tools. So that whole idea of creating broadcast-based product pitches is going to explode because it's becoming so darned easy for people to do it, that the idea of true connection with existing and potential customers will become even more valuable, I predict, in the coming years.
It's getting ready to get a lot noisier with the Chat GPT, I believe, and that authenticness. No, it will be crucial. So
absolutely.
That was a very core piece of literature for me, but my favorite.
I don't know
book,
if I would call it literature, but
well, I've spent.
I
a
always
lot of time
think of
with
literature as hoity-toity kind of, something you had to read in English class.
Well, in one of the books that you wrote, there was a comment that I too say, and that is that you wouldn't go to a networking thing, walk up to a complete stranger and say, "Marry me." And that's pretty much what the advertisers expect to happen. They're shouting at them, they're telling them, "Buy me, buy me, buy me," when I don't even know you.
Right.
And so that is the part that's, I think, really missing. And when everything got turned upside down, that was the secret I was looking for, and I found it in that book.
Yeah, no, and that was an important concept. The concept in that section of the book, I say that social media is very much like a cocktail party. And no, you don't go into a cocktail party and immediately try to sell people.
No.
You don't go into a cocktail party and shout from the center of the room, "Hey, here I am, buy my stuff." But that's what so many companies do. Instead, you go in a cocktail party and just have a conversation with people, and hey, how's it going? What brings you here? How do you know the host? Whatever, just have a conversation. And I think that's what social media is. It works best when you recognize that it's just another way for humans to communicate, not a tool to shout from the mountaintops to try to convince people to buy your stuff.
And you need to become their friend. That's the part. And that brings us to the second book. And this was my favorite book of all of them, and that's FANOCRACY. I've listened to it 3 times. So,
wow. Thank you.
And you co-authored it with your daughter, Reiko Scott.
I did.
And I discovered Audible, so I don't have hard copies anymore. But so I've listened to it, like I said, 3 times because.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also, truth be told, would say that that's my favorite book as well that I've written. It was a lot of fun to write it with my daughter, of course. I think in many ways that book is more groundbreaking even than the one I'm best known for, which is the new rules of marketing and PR. But so I appreciate that you saying it was your favorite as well.
I mean, just watching the whole thing unfold in the relationship between you two, and I like how you set it up, and I love the stories, and I really liked getting to know her as well as getting to know you. You both read them.
I'll give you an update on her. So since the book came out, she's now an emergency room resident at Boston Medical Center here in Boston. She's a third year, which means she's got one more year to go. When we were writing the book, she was in medical school, and she actually lives in the next town over, so I see her frequently, which is super cool. But yeah, she's really doubled down on this idea of medicine, and as we wrote in the book, FANOCRACY is the idea of how do you turn customers into fans and fans into customers. And when we were writing the book, we looked at any type of endeavor, including medicine, including companies, all kinds of different ways that people can connect and build fans.
And what prompted you to actually write this book? Why was this a book that you created?
Well, what was happening when we started working on it, now if I get my years right, it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago that we started working on it. It came out in January of 2020. We finished the manuscript in mid-2019. I think we probably started working on it in 2016 or so. And what was happening then is that people were really beginning to abuse the social media channel. They were really beginning to abuse the email channel. And, just because you can send multiple emails to people is not a good reason to do it. And just because you can try to sell somebody something on LinkedIn when you connect with them is not a good reason to do it. And we were seeing more and more that people were doing that kind of thing. So on one hand, when my daughter and I were talking like over dinner or whatever, we said, this social media thing, it's kind of becoming a clogged channel. It's not as fun anymore. And she agreed with me. And then we also then gravitated to this idea of the things that we're a fan of. And I'm a fan of many things, the Grateful Dead. Of course, I'm a fan of the Apollo Lunar Program. And Reiko, who's my daughter, who's obviously a younger generation, obviously a woman. She's also mixed race. My wife is Japanese. Very different from me in many ways. But and she's a fan of Harry Potter. She's a fan of Korean pop music, K-pop. So we're very different in many ways, but we were the same in these ways. Number one, we both saw this idea that social media was becoming more of a cesspool. Number two, we both recognized how important it is, how important the things that we are a fan of are for us and for our lives. So we decided to do a book about fandom and to look at it from each of our perspectives. And also Reiko did a neuroscience degree in her undergraduate at Columbia. We wanted to add a neuroscience component. So that's what led to the book. We did, a couple of years of research, a couple of years of writing, and fortunately, people seem to like it. It hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It's coming out in 8 different languages at this point. So we're lucky that we hit this idea at the right time, because there had never been a book written specifically about how to build fans and looking at it from the perspective of what's going on in our brains, the neuroscience of why we become fans of something.
Well, and that it's more powerful. Education-based marketing is because you care about who's receiving the information. You're their friend and they become your friend, and it doesn't matter if, Snapchat or, MySpace and they all implode. You're going to have that relationship. And
Yeah,
is
yeah, and
worth more than anything.
what we found that was so important is that our brains, we humans, are hardwired to want to be part of a tribe of like-minded people. So for me, and you can even see some posters behind me. For me, the Grateful Dead is a tribe that I'm a part of. To me, the Apollo lunar program and other fans of the Apollo lunar program, we're a tribe of like-minded people, and finding the tribe and creating a tribe of like-minded people is great marketing, and very few companies think that way. They think more around how am I going to sell my product. They don't think about how I can create a group of people, a community of people that ultimately will end up driving business. That's pretty rare in today's world. We found a number of them, of course, and wrote about them in the book, but that's pretty rare in today's world.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with guest David Meerman Scott and talk about his book, Marketing the Moon, after a brief message from our sponsors. So that's a good segue. And now I'm going to talk about the book that has totally rocked my world. And it has been a major impact for me, which is Marketing the Moon.
Yes.
When Kennedy Space Center, I am standing there at the Atlantis exhibit, and I was trying to figure out what chapter 3 looked like in my life. And my son had just graduated high school, and I had to homeschool. And I'm sure you've been to the Kennedy Space Center and seen.
I have, yep.
It's powerful, and I'm not going to give anything away because you have to experience it. But at that moment, I decided that I had a revelation that I could combine my career that I loved with space that I loved and create something together. And I got so excited. I got home. I started looking on the internet, and you came up and you were doing an interview with Marketing the Moon. And I don't even remember who you were interviewing with, but I'm like, that's the guy that writes all my books that I read.
That's so funny.
So I knew I was on the right spot.
I didn't know that part of the story. That's cool. So you already knew who I was, but then you figured out that I also wrote a book about space. That's interesting.
Yes, and I, have my copy.
Excellent. Here. Look at that. That's awesome.
And I've interviewed quite a few people, and it's amazing how many people have their copies very conveniently located.
Oh, that's
where
great.
They can show them too.
Awesome.
So, but
cool.
I have used that as a like a launching off point.
Yeah.
For quite a bit of what I talk about. And so, do you want to tell us why you wrote it and your journey to the moon?
Yeah, sure. So I was 8 years old when Apollo 11 went up, and it was a very, very important moment for me as a child. That's what I gravitated to. Some of my friends were into sports, but I was really into the Apollo program, and it was going to the moon, and I knew the astronauts' names, and I watched the television broadcasts, and I just found it to be absolutely fascinating. My parents brought me to Kennedy Space Center just prior to Apollo 15 going up. Unfortunately, I really wish we had seen the Saturn V rocket, but we didn't. But we saw the astronauts training. We saw the Saturn V rocket on the in the launch. Actually, it wasn't on the launch pad yet, but we knew it was in the vehicle assembly building. And so that was super cool. And then, like 20 years later, I had a rekindled love for the Apollo program. I kind of lost track of it for a couple decades, but then I gravitated back to it. Read a couple of books about the Apollo program, including Andy Chaikin's great book, and then I started to go to events with the astronauts. The Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, for example, puts on events with the astronauts. And at that time, this was 20 years ago, most of the Apollo guys were still living, and many of them would go to the events. And I was like, I can't believe I'm sitting next to Buzz Aldrin or Alan Bean or Gene Cernan having a meal. This is fabulous. And so I really dug into this love of the Apollo program and everything related to the moon and going to the moon. And I became friends with Richard Jurek. And Rich is a fellow marketer like we are. He has worked at a number of different large companies as a marketing and public relations guy. And one day we just got to talking. It was actually at an Apollo program event. And we got to talking and we said, no one's ever written a book about the marketing aspects of Apollo. I mean, clearly there had to be marketing aspects. There's all the journalism, the public affairs aspect of it. There's the idea that we spent an enormous amount of money. The Americans spent an enormous amount of money on the Apollo program. What prompted that? It had to go through Congress. How did they get it through Congress? And so we decided to tackle that as a project and decided to do it together, to write this book together. So that's how it came together. And then we decided to do it as a full-blown coffee table style book with color images and so on. So that was a different approach rather than just straight text, which is what my other books had been. And then the project itself was fun. We interviewed many of the people who worked on the Apollo program, several of the astronauts we interviewed. Gene Cernan, the last man to walk on the moon, wrote the foreword to our book. We interviewed people who worked in journalism and covered the Apollo program. We interviewed people who were in the public affairs department at companies that built parts of the spacecraft. We interviewed a number of different people related to the marketing aspects of the Apollo program in order to put that book together. And I think you also know that it became a 3-part PBS American Experience miniseries called Chasing the Moon. So I never thought that a marketing book could be turned into a movie, but there you go. A marketing book that I wrote was turned into a movie.
Well, and the thing about the whole NASA, it's a beautiful study of the power of good marketing.
Yes.
And and within the space, it's like, I honestly believe the space industry would not have been here in any way, shape, or form like it is now without NASA pulling the marketing and pulling the public affairs throughout the last decades. I mean, they have been a powerhouse to getting it where it is today.
They've done a great job, and I mean, just look at their Instagram, for example. I haven't checked it recently, but tens of millions of followers. So they're doing a great job at reaching the public in a number of different ways, which is super cool to see. But
it's not enough. And I think everybody has to pull their weight as well within the space industry to make sure that the everyday person knows about it, because there's such a disconnect between the current population and space. They don't realize weather and traffic and all that is dictated by space. Even climate change, we're able to see that from space. And so I think it's all of our responsibilities to toot the horn.
Yeah, I mean, I've generally focused myself on Apollo. That's what's super interesting to me. And yes, there's many other aspects of space that are interesting as well. Some of the robotic missions, some of the photographs coming out of NASA in the last years have been amazing. But my love very much is humans getting to the moon, walking on the moon, living and working on the moon. To me, that's crazy cool, crazy interesting. And I think that human space travel after Apollo was super boring and has been super boring. It's basically just, I call the space shuttle the space dump truck, going around and around and around the Earth for however many times. And then since the space dump truck, we've got the various, the ISS, International Space Station, and so on. And that's, there's interesting stuff going on, but it's basically still low Earth orbit. And we haven't really seen anything dramatic in the form of human space travel since 1972.
Right.
I mean, that's over 50 years. That was the last time that we saw something interesting. There's been pockets of, minor things that are interesting, like Bruce McCandless and his robotic chair kind of thing that he could control from the space shuttle however many years ago, or even Felix Baumgartner's jump out of the balloon using a space suit-like device to break the record for a parachute jump. Those were sort of interesting, but we haven't seen anything in human space travel that's interesting, very interesting in my mind, since 1972. So I'm certainly hopeful that that will then continue, and it looks like it might. And yes, there's been some great stuff in the robotics, but that's what I think we need to do to truly get the average person to pay attention. There has to be something that is compelling for them to pay attention. And sure, beautiful photos will grab some people, but what is going to be that compelling event that can grab other people? Some of the space tourism has been interesting, but the average person can't afford it. I don't know if you know this, but I went on the zero G flight, which was great. So that was that was my experience in space, if you will. And I think probably most of your listeners know, but that's an aircraft that does parabolic arcs. So you get about roughly 20 to 25 seconds of weightlessness in each arc. And over the course of a flight, I think they do 16 arcs. And so that's cool. I can experience weightlessness in the same way that astronauts experience weightlessness. And that's in fact how astronauts train to be weightless. So yeah, it's cool. I had a chance to do that. That was really great. But that's also expensive. So the average person won't be able to do that either. So I think we as marketers have a challenge of how we can get the average person interested when there hasn't been anything dramatic with human space travel for 50 years.
Well, hopefully the Dear Moon will go around the moon this year, and that's with SpaceX. And then hopefully Artemis 2 will go next year, which is a crewed mission. And then, of course, Artemis 3, which is, a woman of color stepping on the moon and returning to the moon. So
that would be amazing. And yes. It would be especially amazing if we could stick to that schedule. And who knows, maybe it will happen. It would be great if it could. Yep.
So one of the things that you have a passion about is also memorabilia. And I don't have anywhere near the collection that you do. And you have 2 websites that have collection. But I do have some artificial regolith.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I have some of that too. Yeah, it's neat, isn't it?
Yes. So I was very excited. Most of my stuff is like the squishy stuff.
It's kind of weird, you have a chance to sort of play with it, put it between your fingers. It's a really weird substance. Most people can understand it. What it feels like is imagine pencil lead that's gone through a pencil sharpener, and the wooden part is all gone. It's only the bits of the pencil lead that gets ground down, and that's what it's like. It's extremely, extremely fine powder. But yeah, I have two collections. I prefer to call them artifacts rather than memorabilia. In my mind, memorabilia are souvenirs that get taken to the moon, like a flag or something. I actually collect artifacts that were used as part of the spacecraft or by the astronauts as part of the mission. So one of my websites is apolloartifacts.com, where you can see many of my things, and I've also got apollopresskits.com. So the artifacts, I just love the idea that I can own things. I should say curate them, because I eventually they will be sold or given to a museum when I no longer am around. So I'm more of a curator for the time being. But I own the Apollo 12 rotational control handle that was used to control the Apollo 12 command module. I have a checklist that was used on the lunar surface by the astronauts of Apollo 17. It's got writing, it's got lunar dust on it. I have an Apollo guidance computer display and keyboard. It's called a Disky, and that was the same display and keyboard that was used to control the lunar module and the command module of the Apollo program. Many Apollo parts of the spacecraft that were important components, like the reaction control engines that were used on the lunar module. So I've got a bunch of crazy cool stuff that I've acquired over the past roughly 20 years, either directly from the astronauts or at auction or through a private sale with another collector. And then I think equally interesting but far less valuable is I probably have the world's best collection of press kits from the contractors who built the parts of the spacecraft for Apollo 11. And I think I've got about 50 different press kits. So the contractors like Raytheon and Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and all the various contractors that built the spacecraft, but also that built components that were used by the astronauts, for example, Hasselblad cameras or even Omega watches, where many of those companies would create press kits to get the media interested in what they were doing, because they wanted to have stories written about them that were related to the Apollo missions. And they created these amazing press kits, absolutely incredible. I believe that I call that content marketing, the same as we talked about when we first started talking about online content marketing. This was obviously offline content marketing, but they created these beautifully developed press kits that would interest the members of the media. And so I've got about 50 of them, but then I digitized them. And so they're now available to anybody who wants to check them out at apollopresskits.com. And I've had a ton of people who've reached out to me since I put those up. I put them up around the time of the anniversary of Apollo 11 in 2019. But many, many people have reached out to say how cool they are, than the fact that I digitized them.
And it's a great study, and it's yes, that's one of my favorite things, is looking at how they were marketing and the education. And we kind of see something similar happening right now with a lot of your brands. Like, for example, Estee Lauder is doing some plastic studies up on the alternative plastic studies up on the ISS. And
interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And a lot of themes are coming into the commercials that, now that we're being forced to watch commercials again, a lot of them have space themes to them.
Yeah.
And so Target even is working on a cotton study up in the ISS. So they're pulling the space into what they're doing and then promoting it as content, and while doing something beneficial.
That's interesting. You've been following it much closer than I have. But yeah, I think that's right. And so number one, they're supporting the program. But number two, they're hopeful that some of the magic will rub off on them. And if they create the kind of content that's valuable for the media or valuable on social media, that they have ways of generating attention because of their association with the space program. So yeah, super cool.
Yeah. So it's kind of the same type of thought processes. So, but when I was considering, I'm going to go back to my book real quick. When I was considering who I wanted to write the foreword, and I sat down, I said, if there was no barriers and I could reach the moon, who would be that person?
Elon
and I want
Musk.
you to know, no. It was never any. You were top of the list, and so I reached
thank you.
out.
I appreciate that.
So, and thank you for that.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm happy to do it. How's the book doing?
It's doing good. I have my second one out now.
Oh, good.
So
congratulations.
So I'm you're inspiring that part of it too. To write
good.
several.
I'm glad. Well, maybe you'll have 12 soon, just like me.
Well, yes, I have 7 lined up, but just one at a time, though. One at a time. You can't do more than one.
Exactly.
So are there any new projects in the works or that you just finished that you want to talk about?
Nothing to talk about. I'm working on a new book, but it's way too early to talk about that. I normally don't talk about books until they're ready to come out. But you know, I've changed a bit due to COVID. I had been doing 30 or 40 paid speaking gigs around the world every year. And I'm still doing paid speaking engagements, but I realized that I don't want to be on airplanes all the time. I don't want to be traveling all the time. And I've got a beautiful home office. My wife also works from her home office. And I recognize that, you know, there's a lot to be said for not always running around all over the world. So it's been an interesting process. You know, COVID, I think, changed many of us, and for me, it changed me in the better because it allowed me to recognize how I was living my life pre-COVID, and then forcing the change because every speaking gig was canceled. So, you know, there is no speaking in 2020 and very little in-person speaking in 21. It started to come back in 22, and then I said, well, wait a minute. I don't have to get on airplanes all the time. I can change up the way I do my business. So that's probably been the biggest change for me since we first met.
And you were right on it too. You know, when COVID happened, and then all of a sudden it's like the breaks happened on all the conferences, and then online conferences started to pop up, but they really didn't know what they were doing. They were kind of just poking at it. You were right there with a book.
I was
on how to have a virtual conference. So
yeah, it's called Standout Virtual Events, and it came out in September of 2020, very, very early into the pandemic. I wrote it really quickly with a friend of mine. We two of us wrote it, got it out really quickly, published it on Amazon so that it could be published pretty much instantly and didn't have to go through the whole rigmarole that you know so well about when you do a print book. And I'm really glad I did, because it was the first book that came out about virtual events post-pandemic. I don't know about right now, but for many years it was the top book on Amazon about virtual events. And what was great about that was it helped to drive my expertise in virtual events and drove speaking gigs. And I've got down the hall that direction, I've got a great home video studio. It's got 4 cameras, lights and great microphones and all that. So that's where I do my virtual events. So writing a book about virtual events is a great way to then generate interest in people who might want to have me speak at their virtual events, and that's exactly what happened.
So yeah, I mean, I've met the world since COVID happened. So there was some sad spots, but for the most part, it has opened my world up rather than close it down.
Yeah, so. Me too. It opened my eyes to other ways to live and work, and so that was super helpful.
So one last question.
Sure.
What thoughts do you want to leave our audience with today as they go out their day? What do you want them to think about?
So I am just a huge believer that a couple of different things. Number one, I've always tried to live my life focused on things that are enjoyable, things that are great experiences. And that served me really well over my life. And then in my career, I made a decision a very, very long time ago, just as I was getting out of college, is that I was going to choose a career path, and make decisions not based on money, but rather based on what would be the most interesting. And that's what I did. And many of my friends did the opposite. They were focused on what was going to generate the most money. Ironically, by focusing on things that were most interesting to me, the money came. And so that's a good thing. But it also allowed me to live a career that's been super interesting and fun and rewarding. And I'm sure would not have been the same had I focused on trying to generate the most income along the way.
And I have a saying, I said, life is too short to be boring.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I'm with you on that one.
So, well, I want to thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. And thank you so much for the work that you have done. Like I said, it has impacted me in so many ways. So I'm definitely a fan.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate you very much buying multiple copies of my various books and for inviting me to write the foreword to your book. I appreciate that, Izzy.
Please subscribe before you head on over to my YouTube channel for bonus footage. Links to the YouTube and other social media channels can be found on spacemarketingpodcast.com. A special thanks to David Meerman Scott for sharing his journey to space. Be sure to check out his links listed in today's show notes. This podcast has been a sneak peek into my journey to space. One thought to leave you with today is when you reach for the moon, sometimes you touch it. I hope you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.